Joe Finn. Joe was named the Executive Director of the Mass Housing Shelter Alliance in October in 2003. Joe was the Executive Director of Shelter Inc. in Cambridge, Massachusetts from 1998 to the beginning of his work with the Mass Housing Shelter Alliance. Prior to coming to the shelter, he served as Executive Director, I know many of you know him from this, to the Quincy Interfaith Shelter Coalition and its shelter program, Father Bill's Place, which is now Father Bill's Mainspring. Joe has dedicated the last 20 years to working in the area of homelessness and is committed to the challenge of ending homelessness. In all these positions, Joe is concentrating the expansion of permanent supportive housing opportunities for individuals, including chronic homeless individuals. The Mass Housing Shelter Alliance initiative, under Joe's leadership, Home and Healthy for Good, has led to the housing of over 1,000 chronic homeless persons across Massachusetts. This was recognized with a 2010 Innovation Award by Root Cause's Social Innovation Forum. So the MHSA also led the effort during this period to create CSPECH, a nationally recognized homeless community support service reimbursement by Medicaid. He was awarded the 2010 Pioneer Institute's National Better Government Award for his work containing the cost of Medicaid by providing housing for the chronic homelessness. In July of 2012, under Joe's leadership, the Mass Housing Shelter Alliance was awarded the Massachusetts Pay for Success Social Innovation Financing Contract to house chronic homeless persons. This is one of the first Pay for Success to deal with homelessness in the world. To date, it has housed over 950 people. Joe is a 1978 graduate of Santa College. He also earned a Master's of Arts degree in Theology from Washington Theological Union, a Master of Arts degree in Sociology from New School for Social Research, a Juris Doctor from the New England School of Law, and Honorary Doctor of Humanities from Bentley College. He was elected in 2001 and served as a City Council at Large in the City of Quincy through December of 2017. He's married to Dolores, and he's the father of 6 boys and 1 girl. And I had the good privilege of serving along Joe for a number of years. Although it's interesting, the early years, I always felt there was this little friction between him and I. I was a department and he was a councilor. And when I went up there, he'd be ready to grill me every time. Always thoughtful, always respectful. I tell you, his style of leadership, his style of conducting himself would be a fresh, combination in Washington, that's for sure. Joe's a class guy. I also saw another side of Joe when our kids were playing lacrosse together. We're at the Veterans Memorial Stadium. And Joe was rooting on the team. It was an experience I'll never forget because it was a side of Joe I never saw. It was like out of this body experience. And I looked at his wife, Dolores, she said, yep, that's my Joe. But at the end of the day, it really was about the passion. His passion for the sport of lacrosse, his passion for the kids playing the sport. Joe has great passion for his fellow man. He's a man of God, he's a family man, he's a man of this community. And we're so grateful for his service, and I'm so grateful he said yes to saying hello this morning. Joe Finn.
Thank you, Mayor Koch, for that wonderful introduction. I don't think my behavior at lacrosse games is any secret any longer. I mean, I think others have witnessed it. But again, Mayor Koch, thank you. Also, President of the City Council, Councilor Liang, and all my former council colleagues. Let me just stop there for a second. I think that it's a wonderful sign of the resiliency and hope of this city to see the diversity that we have today on our city council. And when I first started my career in 2002, if somebody at that time told me that there would be an Asian American woman who was the president of the city council, I'd have said, oh no, I find that kind of hard to believe. But if someone had told me that that president of that city council would be the freshman in high school who lived across the street from me, that would have even been harder to believe. And you can imagine the excitement I felt in 2015 when she invited me out to coffee to tell me that she was running against me. And Mayor, this is at that point where I have to make a little bit of confession. I used all of my energy to try to convince her to run for mayor. That's a trick I learned from our DA Morrissey, who I see here. Taught me that. But again, members of the clergy, other elected officials, honored guests, it is an incredible honor for me to be here this morning to remember Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I remember 1968. I am old enough to remember 1968. I was 12 years old at the time. And I got to tell you that one of the reasons 1968 sticks out in my mind is because growing up in a lower middle class family, somehow my parents had managed to eke out enough money to rent a ramshackle cottage on Shirley Reservoir to go for 2 weeks vacation for swimming and fishing and just a great time. It was the only time growing up that our family ever went away together on a vacation. And so that really sticks in my mind even to this day. However, 1968 has some other memories that were seared into the consciousness of somebody who was 12 years old at the time. First of all, there was a war that was waging on our TV screens on the news every single night. There was political unrest that was happening all the time. Lyndon Baines Johnson announced that he wasn't going to seek re-election for the presidency. There was student activism, urban upheaval, the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. When I was in that little cottage out on Shirley Reservoir, the Soviet invasion of Prague, the Democratic Convention in Chicago, and of course, most significant for us today was the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in April of that year. Today, we gather here to share the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King. But what does it really mean for us to have memory? What does that even mean? Just this past December 2nd, a priest and theologian in Germany died. He was 91 years old, and his name was Father Johann Baptist Metz. And around 1979, published in 1980, he wrote his classic work, which was called Faith in History and Society. And the reason I bring it up today is because in that work, he said that there's two types of memory that we can have. One type of memory leads us away deceptively from the risks of the future. Memories where we do not take the past seriously enough, and where the past becomes a paradise without danger, a refuge from our present disappointments. Much like that summer cottage, when I think back of that, overrides some of the more darker and other memories I experienced in my family life. These types of memories are what we often refer to as the good old days. You know those, right? Where everything was great. And he wrote this back in 1980 or 1979, and I think about this, it's a type of memory where the past is filtered through a harmless cliche. But, he wrote, there's another type of memory. In that memory, or these memories he referred to as dangerous memories. These are the memories which make demands on us. These memories can break through our lives and reveal new and dangerous insights for the present. They are memories with a future content and direction. They are disruptive memories, leading us to hope toward a better future. So, as we gather this morning, we have to ask this question. If we could ask it of him, which unfortunately we cannot, which type of memory would Dr. King prefer we use? Would he prefer a kind of nostalgic memory, recalling his achievements, acknowledging his character, and celebrating as though he was totally victorious in establishing civil rights in our nation? Kind of that complacent type of memory? Or might he not prefer the dangerous memory of Dr. King, who would remind us that we too, right at this present moment, think about this as we gather here this morning, there are forces that are gathering in Richmond, Virginia. He would remind us that we too are in difficult times, and we are called to address the racial, economic, and social injustice that we encounter in it. Before you answer that question, I think we should consider a few things today. First, white supremacy is on the rise, as well as anti-Semitic hate crimes, and sometimes these are actually encouraged by some of our elected leaders. We live presently in a society where often one's life expectancy can be determined by their zip code. We live today where African American children are twice as likely to have asthma as white children. And oftentimes this is due to historic matters related to housing. We live in a world accounted for in the 2018 report to the United Nations on racial disparities in the U.S. criminal justice system. This indicated that African Americans are more likely than white Americans to be arrested. Once arrested, they are more likely to be convicted, and they are more likely, after being convicted, more likely to experience lengthy prison terms. As of 2001, for African American boys born in that time, 1 in 3 had a likelihood of going to prison compared to 1 in 17 of white boys. Think a moment, we live in a society where the median health, wealth, again by median, assets and liabilities, the full amount, where the median white household wealth is $134,000, and the median African American household is around 11,000. And this median African American household difference is due in great part to historic questions around building equity in housing. Just last week, the HUD, what they call the AHAR report, the Annual Homeless Assessment Report from HUD, African Americans have remained considerably overrepresented among the homeless population compared to the U.S. population. African Americans accounted for 40% of all people experiencing homelessness in 2019, and 52% of people experiencing homelessness as members of families with children, despite being only 13% of the US population. In contrast, 48% of all people experiencing homelessness were white, compared to 77% of the population. Reasons for this, to me, seem to be obvious. The principles of the Fair Housing Act were actually passed in 1968 as a reaction to the assassination of Dr. King, and yet the promise of those principles have yet to be fulfilled in an affirmative manner. And in fact, in 2017, House Republicans were trying to pull back on the rules that the Obama administration had passed to enforce the principles of the Fair Housing Act. Now, for any of you who thinks that this phenomenon is purely accidental or a part of some de facto segregation, I would encourage you to read The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, which outlines the de jure systemic and legal constructs in place that have reinforced the economic inequality of African Americans even to the present day. And I wish to stress, this is not about victimization, this is about simple justice. Martin Luther King was really a person of his time. He had his shortcomings and his failings, just like any one of us here today. But I think what really made him stand out was the fact that at a critical moment, he was willing to stand up, to speak out against racial injustice, to speak out against economic injustice, to speak truth and before power, not in a violent way, but in a peaceful way, but yet was willing to suffer the violence and the consequences of speaking out. To me, that was key to what his memory truly is, because it speaks to each of us. Are we willing to do the same? It's important, you know. Why? Because we're not too far from that point when there will be anyone surviving who will actually remember having heard Dr. Martin Luther King, or have seen him on the news, or have heard of his speeches. That time continues to pass. And so if his memory is to live in its truest sense of the word, then it becomes important that we decide what type of memory it is that we wish to have. He was when Dr. King wrote his famous letter from Birmingham jail. And it's interesting, he was in there for 11 days, I believe. And it occurred during Holy Week. And it was a time when they were trying to boycott the stores in Birmingham to, again, see if they could not override the segregation that existed within that city. But as he was in there, he was smuggling out this letter. He had first started writing on the margins, on the edges of a newspaper, and was smuggling these words out. And we hear all the time, at this time of year, people throw out the quotes of Dr. Martin Luther King. But there's one quote in that letter that strikes me, that just jumps out. And one of the things he noted, and I may be paraphrasing this a little bit, but he noted that time is neutral. And he was saying that to the people who said, no, the ministers that he was reacting to in that letter who had wrote and said, it's not time for justice. You need to wait. You need to be more patient. It isn't time for this. and he said that time is neutral. He said it can be used constructively or destructively. And kind of one of the more humorous comments that he made, he said, I have a grave fear that the evil and unjust are more aware of this fact and using that time far better than those of us who seek justice. But I think it leaves us, if we are going to honor his true memory, his dangerous memory, then each of us have to ask ourselves that question. What are we going to do with our time as it relates to the society, to the community, to the state that we live in? Will we use it constructively, or will we, even by our complacency, use it destructively? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe, so much. Great words. Great words of challenge. I want to embarrass his son, Mike Femme. Will you stand up? Mike attended St. Joe's College with my son, but Mike broke the scoring record lacrosse up at St. Joe's. His father was very, very proud of that. I also want to acknowledge, I know Chris Walker mentioned it during the inauguration, but Senator Keenan just returned from over 3 weeks of working in a refugee camp in Greece, dealing with those that have been ravaged by war, driven out of Syria, many of them Christians. Imagine driven out of your home, your neighborhood, you have nothing with you but your own person, and having to deal with that. So thank you, Senator Keenan, for being an example to all of us how we can make a difference. I'm going to ask now, we're going to have a performance by our Germantown Neighborhood Center music students. Focus your way down to this end.
So we're going to have 3 performances. Our first performance is from Ali Boyd, who's one of our teams that comes to the Germantown Neighborhood Center Music Center. Next up, we have Jonathan Tan.
How's everybody doing? Some technical difficulties there. Give it up for Allie Boyd. So I was thinking about Dr. Martin Luther King the other day, or a few days ago, and I couldn't really come up with the song that really sent a message to that I wanted to, so I wrote one. And so this one's called At the End of the Day. If you want, you can go. Stand around and say that nothing is wrong. Or if you want, you can stand up strong. Say what you've been needing for so long. If the light coming through at the end of the war shouts your name, don't look back in the dark, you can be the one who lights the flame. Don't let this world burn down in silence. Use your voice, don't use the violence. Maybe you will have a dream by the end of the day. If you want, you can go alone. Sit around and say that nothing's wrong. We all need to keep each other strong. If we can't, then we just won't go on. If the light coming through at the end of the war shouts your name, don't look back in the dark, you can be the one who lights the flame. Don't let this world go down in silence. Use your voice, don't use the violence. Maybe we will all have a dream by the end of the day. If you know what to do, you can stand with us too. Should we fall, we'll be joined by millions like me and you. If the light coming through at the end of the wall shouts your name, don't look back in the dark, you can be the one who lights the flame. Don't let this world burn down in silence. Use your voice, don't use the violence. Maybe we will all have a dream by the end of the day. Oh, oh, at the end of the day. Oh, oh, at the end of the day.
Next up, we're going to have a dance performance by some girl power group. Thank you very much, and these were all performances from the South Shore YMCA Germantown Neighbourhood Centre. Thank you, have a great day.
Thank you so much. Feel good about the future after that, don't you? Remarkable. I want to again thank our high school students for the great work on the breakfast this morning, all the folks that helped put today together, the folks from the YMCA. And I did want to acknowledge, I know that the very wonderful speech that Joe Finn spoke of, he talked about memory and how we remember things. And you know, yesterday we lost a great American here in Quincy. Mr. Russ Erickson, who was 97 years old, he had flown 33 bombing missions over Europe in the fight against evil at that time. So keep Mr. Erickson in your prayers. He lived a great life. He was a true American patriot. Another reminder that freedom is not free. We got to hold to our faith. We got to remember that, in my opinion, we have far more in common with each other in this country than what divides us. We truly do. We got to find that common ground. So let us pray for peace in our hearts, peace in our homes, and peace in the world. Enjoy your day. God bless.